Hey, welcome back to the Shenandoah University Speaker Series, just sponsored by the Center for Story. I'm Sean Murphy, and I direct the center, which, as of right now, is a robust but virtual presence. We are here really to celebrate and interrogate all aspects of story and storytelling. We have each semester we have a monthly speaker come sometimes in person, sometimes virtually. And the whole idea is to invite experts to interface with students and faculty. And my role is to ask them to not only talk about their areas of expertise, but we really do like to kick around this notion of how story, of course, is very directly tied to the arts and the humanities, but with even a little bit of investigation, it becomes increasingly clear that story is everything. So whether we're talking about business or politics, marketing, PR, technology, entertainment, etc., story and narrative play a huge part in that. So the fun of this initiative is to really explore story from a lot of different directions. We are recording this, so whether you're here live right now or you're watching this later, you can reach out to me and I can even get questions to our special guest tonight after the fact if you didn't have a chance to ask in real time. But let's kick this party off. I am extraordinarily happy and honored. This is our first virtual iteration of the speaker series, and I've invited my friend Grant Shonkwiler. This is He was kind enough to enthusiastically say yes. Oh, we've got so many amazing things to talk about, but let me read a bio so we can officially kick things off, and you'll see why I'm so enthusiastic and so grateful that he's taken the time to be here with us. Um, and we'll go from there. But um, Grant started making games when he was 12 years old and has since filled many different roles in the game industry. Programmer, lead designer, tech producer, and is currently a leadership coach and production consultant. His career has taken him from casual games at Mega Touch Games to AAA shooters at id Software to Epic Games to work on a little game you might have heard of called Fortnite. He currently runs his own consulting company and is the co-author of four books, including Gear Up, Advanced Game Development Practices. Grant enjoys building communities within the industry and is still conceptualizing new ideas, which we will get into. Grant, thanks so much for being here. Welcome to the Shenandoah Speaker Series.
Thank you, thank you. I wish I could do it in person, but I'm happy to do it virtually from the comfort of my office while my two kids scream downstairs. So if you hear screaming, they're fine. That's just their normal state.
Right on. Well, before we jump in, we also have a special guest tonight. Caitlin, you were going to say a few quick words, which I encourage you to feel free to do.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I think this is so cool and so exciting that you guys are putting together this event. This is so cool. Um, so my name's Caitlin. I'm the secretary of Shenandoah's chapter for Sigma Tau Delta. We're basically the National Honor Society of English here at SU. And basically, our role here is we want to be able to give students the opportunity, um, whether that's through academic opportunities, also finding students potential publication opportunities, awards, grants, scholarships, anything that may get them some kind of connection in a professional sense within English studies. Um, we, as a group on campus, we do events throughout the semester, like we do poetry workshops, charity book drives, and we're working on a couple of different themes this upcoming semester of, different literary months to celebrate. So keep an eye out for more information on that if you are interested. In order to become a part of Sigma Tau Delta, you would need to have at least three English classes beyond just the English 101 class, with a grade point average above a B. And then Um, I do have a link for students if they were interested to fill out a form if they potentially thought this may apply to them or wanted to get more information about joining us. But I can also just say my email. You can contact me directly, kgarback, GARBACK 21 at su.edu. You can contact me that way and I can answer any questions about Sigma Tau Delta.
Amazing. And Caitlin, when we're done and I do my wrap up, I'll put your information in the summary so people can reach right out to you.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Fun
All
fact,
right.
I snuck into a Sigma Tau Delta conference in Pittsburgh in 2009 to go to some poetry readings of a girlfriend that I was dating at the time. And she told me, "You'll never get in. You don't have an official pass." All I did was I put on a jacket and a scarf. Everybody thought I was a writer. It was great. So I had a great time. So that's what I think of every time I hear of Sigma Tau Delta.
That's incredible.
I love it. I love it. And as a poet myself, I would say there's very few people trying to impersonate poets. So it's usually fair. It's usually fair game.
Yeah, I don't think they were like, you can't come into this poetry reading. They're like, come in, come in.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Well, I couldn't think of a better segue in introduction than that. But Grant, you and I have chatted before, so I know your story, but I think it would be helpful. I mean, that bio. Look, I'm impressed. I'm a fan. But what did I miss, or if you just want to talk us through? Because again, especially as a non-techie, and I say that with maximum humility and awe. Like I know how to work my way around a computer, but
Yeah,
I don't think the bio actually does like it hits the high points,
sure.
amazing.
Yeah.
But in terms of like, who are you? And you are a fan of story. I'm not going to ask you to contextualize your amazing career through narrative, but I know you believe in that. So
Yeah.
what did I miss in the bio in terms of like what makes you tick and how would you kind of assess like the journey you've been on? And then we'll get into how it continues and how all these different, intersecting points connect.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for asking. I like this question because it allows me to tell a story. So there's that fun little blurb at the beginning about starting making games when I was 12 years old, and that story I think is a fun story to tell, but it's also foundational. And I find a lot of people reflect this story in their own journey into the industry. I was playing a Pokemon game with a friend, and we were trading the cartridge back and forth on Game Boy, and I did something that was in his mind unforgivable. I taught Pikachu cut, and it ruined his vision of how we were going to train Pikachu or whatever. And we got into a fist fight, and I remember physically looking at him. There's maybe some blood trickling down, and I said, "Wait, this can't come in between our friendship. What if we just made a better game than Pokemon?" And so we did in our minds. We wrote out the story and the game design for a game that we called Pokemon Killer. I remember specifically writing it in red ink. I don't know why. And we wrote this on paper, and it was very formal. And I sent it to an address that I found for Sony, and I said, "Hey, this is." You're going to beat Nintendo if you make Pokemon Killer. And they wrote me back. They actually wrote me back and they said, "Well, thanks. We don't want to be sued, but we encourage you to continue your journey in game development." So I angrily learned to program and started modding and doing things like that because I wanted to make Pokemon Killer because I was so angry that a video game could come in between my best friend and I at the time. And he and I, as we went through middle school, high school together, we had stories we wanted to tell, and we said, "Hey, let's tell those stories in games." We started to write this book series where it was this really novel idea of, again, we're teenagers, high schoolers, of two authors writing distinctly different stories, but they actually were in the same universe, but nobody would know that until book like 6 or whatever would come out. And both of us quickly realized we're not great writers, but we knew how to make games already, and so we went to university to learn learn to make games. And we kind of parted ways at university. He decided not to go into the industry, and I decided to go into it, and that's kind of been, that spirit has been through me the entire time I've been in the industry, which is, um, I want to do something interesting. I want to do something different. And so I kept going to places to learn different skill sets and different things. And so, I've done a variety of things. When I first made my first business card to get into the industry, it said designer, producer, and programmer. And I went to a job fair and I handed it to somebody and they said, "You have to pick one." And I said, "Well, which one are you hiring for?" And I've done all those things in my career, and I still do them today. I was programming and doing game design earlier today, in between my leadership coaching and my consulting business. So I think the story is uh, the curiosity that I had as a 12-year-old and the um, animosity that I had has stuck with me of like, I can do this. I can do something good. I can make good games and tell good stories and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a little bit more detail of my journey and my story into this.
So thank you for that. And I think that actually just really illustrates something that I repeat all the time, which is first, for people that want good stories, the advice is always pretty simple. It's either tell your own story because everyone
Mm,
has a story, or people that are unsatisfied with the stories that exist, tell
yeah.
a better story. Your life, trajectory literally epitomizes that. And I think what you get at there is that impulse that again transcends certainly the arts and entertainment and getting into everything from politics to business, which is
Mm,
curiosity, dissatisfaction, and this kind of relentless drive to inject one's own kind of passions and enthusiasms and ability into some kind of narrative form. And with you,
mm,
clearly programming gaming is one of the ways, not the only, but one of the ways that you channeled all of those impulses. Um, what I think is so all, so what I think is applicable and interesting, especially as we're thinking about students, right? Or
mm,
or
mhm,
or people of the age that they're entering or thinking about entering the workforce, even within your story with tremendous expertise, tremendous successes, it's so critical, I think, in 2025 especially, to always be cognizant, like no matter what one's area of expertise or one's area of enthusiasm and passion, one has to be telling a story that is keeping up technologically with the times and
mm,
is able to reach audiences. Because I think from my own background, being a younger writer in a more analog era, there was this kind of romantic notion, if you write the best story, it'll find its way. That was always a special, specious sentiment. But now I think very few people have any illusions. Like in this information overload, contextual world we live in order to have even a chance of your awesome idea, you have to meet the people where they are. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how it's always a work in progress, right? Learning, mastering technology, but technology is moving at light speed. So there's these immense pressures, whether we're thinking about how one enters the professional workspace or does the kind of things you've done, that are creative pursuits that become businesses. There's this technological intersection that's critical. Like one cannot be aloof to all of these
yeah.
these changing things.
Yeah, there's a person who I really look up to. I've never met this person, but I wish I had a life like theirs. And it's a man in Japan who makes ink stones for calligraphy. And he's the master of this. He's like the most well known. He sells these ink stones for thousands of dollars. His craft has not changed in the 35 years he's done it. He's been doing it the same way he was taught 40 years ago. He has no internet presence. He has none of these things, and he can do that. And that sounds really cool, right? Like to just dedicate yourself to a craft and
Yeah.
not care anything about the outside of that.
Yeah.
We don't get that option. That's why I really look up to this guy, because I wish I was in a place where I could just focus on my craft and do it every day and love what I do. But the reality of the situation is We got to put food on the table. And there's so much stuff out there that it's hard to be noticed with what you're doing. I recently released I make maps for Fortnite. It's a open source thing. You can do this. And the day I released a map, 300 other maps came out. 300. 150,000 people looked at my map in the first 2 hours it came out, and then no one played it again, right? Because 300 came out. I had no social presence to do this. I was just pushing it out to just kind of test some ideas, and kind of learn the technology. But 300. So how do you stick out in that crowd? And so I think the reality of the situation is you have to constantly be learning about what's going on around you. You have to understand what signals come through the noise. This is even if you're just trying to get a job at a bigger company, right? How do you stand out in the crowd of thousands of people applying for a job? And I think your craft is the main thing always. The work that you do, be that writing or programming or whatever, you have to be good at that. But then on top of that is um, what I'll call it soft skills, but digital soft skills. And so always presenting yourself in a way that it's professional, having conversations with people, be that in person or digitally, whatever platform you choose to use, presenting yourself in that way. Now, this is not the same as have a brand, always be your brand. That is a thing, right? That is a thing. If you want to go be a writer or you want to be a solo game developer, you need to have a brand. You need to have an identity that people can latch onto in whatever way. If you're just trying to get a job, that's not as important as being really good at what you do and being competent to talk to, and being involved in things like Sigma Tau Delta, right? Like being involved in communities is, I think, the thing that has helped me the most in my career. Is the people that I've met through community are the people who have kind of pulled me through my career. And it was because I maintained kind of that professional, curious learning persona. I asked lots of questions of them, and they're like, "Hey, do you want to come help us with this?" And I'm like, "I don't really know. Sure, yeah, I guess."
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. I want to say for those that have joined, if I should have said at the outset, I always say in the live ones, these are very informal conversations, and I am the facilitator, but I do not want to necessarily ask all the questions, especially if you have questions. So you can either unmute and take yourself on video to ask it. You can put it in the chat, and I know we're in the presence of greatness. Dr. Prestopnik is here. Nate, I want to respectfully say too, if you want to jump in at any point, I know you've got better questions. I've got a ton, but please don't. Nobody that's on right now, wait till the end. If you've got something to say or to specifically directly ask Grant, jump in at any time. I welcome that.
Thank you. I think greatness might be a stretch, but I appreciate it. I probably will ask some questions, but I'll wait a little bit.
Okay. Well, I again, I want to be less selfish. There's so many, what you've already teed up has fed me so many things I want to follow up on, and maybe I will. But one thing I definitely wanted to be cognizant of, and I think I'd be remiss, again, thinking about a student-facing conversation in this video that will live on, that people can watch, thinking specifically about people that are, again, contemplating the reality of paying the bills. I know you've told some great stories, a couple that I've heard about mentorships and how we're definitely talking about resumes, right? We're definitely talking about staying curious, being abreast of developments, polishing one's brand and expertise. All of those absolutely critical. But you've got some great stories about how you were assisted and now you pay it forward. I look at that as something I'd love you to talk a little bit about as inspiration, but also I think it's good for any student or anyone that's watching this to remember making these connections and networking. Although we always kind of almost have to do this because it's such an overused cliche, but the real
Yeah,
literal definition of networking is a very positive, very proactive, phenomenon, and it's something that those of us that have had careers can look back on and go, we either, whether they were mentors or mentees or anywhere in between, these become lifelong associations, and it helps
yeah.
us get the signal through the noise, as you eloquently put it earlier. But maybe talk a little bit about your thoughts about that, Grant, just high level.
Yeah, I think it's been essential to my career, both being a mentor and having mentors. The story I like to tell is, I wanted to make games because of Deus Ex, the original game that came out in the late '90s. And I got the opportunity while I was still in college to go to the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, and I saw that the guy who led that project, his name was Warren Spector, was going to be speaking at the conference. I was there as a volunteer, and so I requested to work his talk. I then went early just in case, right? And so I was just sitting in the room, just kind of sitting there. There was other people speaking. I wasn't really interested in the topics going on. I wasn't expert enough to follow the conversations, and there's only about 30 people in the room. There's probably 150 seats, and who comes and sits right next to me? But Warren Spector, the guy who I came to the conference to meet, and he sits down next to me, and I just turned 18 years old, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And there was a break in the speakers, and I turned to him and I said, Mr. Spector, you're the reason I'm here. I've loved the games that you've made, blah 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 blah. And he goes, wow, that's great. And we start talking. We talk for about 10 minutes, and he says, hey, look, um, why don't I give you my phone number and my email, and I'd love to walk with you on your journey into this industry. Now, very important. Warren has never got me a job. He's never recommended me for a job. He's never done anything like that. But what he did was anytime I got to an interesting place, be that creatively or early in my career, I would just send him an email or a text and say, hey, I have a question about this thing. And he would provide his, by the way, 25 years already at that point. So now he's 40 years into his career. He would provide his expertise in a very kind way. And so that was eye opening for me that someone of that caliber, someone in the industry that many people look up to, was willing to, help me. And so I've had that opportunity both on the other side where people have come to me and asked for my help, and to go and ask other people. And what I find is that most people, even if you think they're a big deal, are willing to answer some questions, right? And so I start by just asking them a couple questions, very pointed questions, right? I never say, how do you get into the industry? That's not useful. But hey, can you tell me about a time that you dealt with a conflict that you were unable to resolve in design decision making or creative conflict in some way? How do I walk through this situation? They'll provide some feedback on that. And so that's been really key. I've had 4 or 5 major mentors in my life that have walked with me for many, many years. And I myself try to keep 2 or 3 mentees, that are younger in the industry around at all times. And what's been really rewarding is some of those mentees have gone to companies and hired me as a coach or as a consultant many, many years later. There's also nothing I find more exciting than seeing one of my former mentees be really successful. And what's great is they're just my friends now. They may still ask me questions here and then, but in reality, they're just my friends. And I think that's the great cheat of networking is we're just asking you to go make friends. We're not asking you to hand over business cards or resumes in the moments. Just ask people questions about themselves. If you're introverted and you don't want to talk, just ask them questions about themselves. Most people are, they like to talk about themselves. So that's been kind of my key to networking is I just go and I ask people lots of questions and I kind of sit there and try and relate to those questions in whatever way possible. But very rarely am I the one talking.
So thank you for that. And that you just that's like a great 1-2 punch, right? Because I would have felt responsible to elicit that answer and you just teed it up on a platter. But it's the encouragement to not only network and ask those questions, but you also mentioned, which I will highlight. Um, Even if you mean well, you don't want to overwhelm someone by asking them, necessarily for a favor or
Hmm.
specific advice, but the whole notion of asking questions, showing that you're curious, it's a great conversation starter. So a good way to break that ice and not feel like you have to ask the perfect, make the perfect introductory remark. You're just getting on their radar.
Hmm.
But the other thing that you mentioned, which again, your career and your personality kind of exemplifies this, but even in my world, in the writing world, I think a mistaken assumption that gets made is what's referred to as the scarcity model, which is that whether it's a writer or a game developer or a boss, of any sort, an influencer, the false notion that, well, if I help so and so, there's less for me. What I've seen play out over and over again, and again, I greatly appreciate you proving this. There's ample proof that this exists, but it's usually the exact opposite. Those that are at high levels of achievement want to spread the wealth. They want
Hmm.
to share their knowledge. They want to expand the realm that they're in by inviting more people in to make it bigger and better and more
Yeah.
diverse. So the scarcity model in a capitalist society does exist. There's competition, there's only so much of the pie, but the reality is most of these people that could become mentors are generous. They want to share their knowledge and they want to help. So,
Yeah.
so I think I offer that really only to just underscore this notion that for job seekers or students or anyone that's trying to navigate a scary world, there are a lot of potential helping hands and voices out there. But I think it's also incumbent on the student or job seeker or whomever to do the research, to be
Yeah.
active, to be following the industry trends, read widely, read newspapers and magazines so that you have points of entry. Back when I was a student, again, it was a more analog world. So you might not have known how to get a hold of someone. You kind of sent a letter to an editor at a newspaper and hoped it got through. These days, the barriers of entry are so much easier. Most people have websites with a contact form. It's
Yeah.
so easy to reach out virtually. I guess what I'm saying to put a fine point on is there's no excuse to not be
Right.
actively looking to expand your own network. Does that ring true with you, Grant?
Yeah, absolutely. I speak quite a bit in different conferences and at universities and stuff like that. And I tell this factoid all the time. Um, I will always say, hey, feel free to contact me. You can join me on LinkedIn. You can go to my website and email me or whatever. Um, I've spoken in front of hundreds of people, and rarely does someone reach out to me. And I'm talking students, right? People who have asked me questions, people who have maybe mentioned like, oh, I really look up to your career and what you're doing. I've now given you a free opportunity to use me and ask me questions of a level of expertise that I'm surprised I still have. And and they just choose not to do it. When I was a student, anytime I met a game developer and they gave me any into their contact information, I emailed them within a day or two because I was just so hungry for knowledge, but also connection, right? Like I didn't know where it was going. And some of those people are my dear friends today, right? Like I still talk to them on a regular basis. And they were just random people who maybe spoke at an event that I was at. They put their contact information up. I asked them a question, and they offered their time freely to me. And I think that's the other thing that's really important. In this hustle culture, there are a lot of people who will scam you and say, "Hey, yeah, I'll show you how to get a book published, or I'll show you how to be a game developer, but you got to pay me, or you got to watch my class." The reality is, most people will do this for free. I am a paid consultant and I will talk to you for free. Right? Like, I'm not going to charge a student. I'm not going to charge someone new in their career. I don't even charge small indie studios because you just need help. And I don't think it's ethically fair. And what I find is that, especially in my industry, it's really growing, is there's a lot of these people who have never really done anything, but they're charging for their expertise that they don't have, which they're really grifting, right? It's a lot of grifting. And I'm sure that exists in the publishing world too. The reality is most people, no matter where they are in their career, unless they're, Miyamoto who invented Mario, like they're probably willing to give you a 15-minute phone call or reply to an email. They just are for free.
Yep. And for anyone that, still kind of bristles a little bit at the word networking, what we're really talking about that I think encapsulates even more and even a bigger tent is this notion of community. I
Hmm.
certainly talk about it a lot. And I think that's even another word that people are like, what do you mean by community? And what we're talking about here is you're part of something ideally that you're interested in. So whether it's the gaming community, the publishing, or all of the above, you're part of something that exists outside of your own, four walls, which is a reciprocal relationship. You're expanding your network of influences, of contacts, of potential, connecting points for jobs or gigs or whatever. But you're also, it's an antidote to loneliness. It's an
Yeah.
antidote to all the things we talk about that aren't great about social media. The snarkiness or being bombarded with ads, all the reasons why we want these points of contact and these human connections. The notion of community I've found is profoundly strong in all of these different areas. And again, whether I'm talking about business, politics, arts, gaming, etc. Um, you've already kind of articulated, but anything you would add to that, Grant, as it relates to community and why? I mean, you've already done it, but why it's important for, individuals will see the myriad benefits of kind of being involved in something bigger than them.
Yeah. Well, we're wired for community. We as society only exist because of community, and that sounds like such an obvious statement, but we are the only um, the only animals that do community the way we do it. And what I mean by that is we expand beyond our immediate location. Other communities don't do that. Other animals don't do that, and that's why we are the dominant animal on Earth. But um, what's happened over years is we've divided communities, right? So community used to be church or your neighborhood or your local sports team or whatever it might be was your community, and we've destroyed that idea. We've destroyed that. Most people don't go to a religious affiliation. Most people live in a neighborhood where they have to drive or they don't talk to their neighbors, and their community is the rabid fans of sports team A, right? Or the rabid fans of political party B. And that's not real community because it's not um there's no reality to that. It's a fandom. But what is interesting is we're all nerds, right? Every person on earth is a nerd for something. And you're either a nerd for writing or you're a nerd for gaming or you're a nerd for movies. And if you want to be in the community of those fellow nerds, it's very easy to talk to them. If I go to a game developers conference, I know I have one thing in common with every single person there. They like video games. Right. So I'm able to there's immediately a topic that we can talk about that brings us together in community. If I go to a book conference of some kind, right? When I was at Sal Tigmedale, when I was at their conference, everyone there was a writer, except for me. But everyone there was a writer and a storyteller and a poet. And I watched these introverted people who think they're communities of one, and they have this idealized vision of, sitting in a room writing their great American novel by themselves. And I watched my girlfriend at the time. I watched her blossom out of her introvertedness to just this thing of look at my people, I'm here with my people, and radiate that energy. And so I think it's absolutely necessary. It's what we've like I said, what were were born to do is be in community, and finding your nerd community to come alongside you is really important, especially when we're doing a craft, right? Because it can be very lonely, even on a huge team of hundreds of people. You might be the only lighting artist or technical artist. So having a community outside of your studio is also just as important.
Great stuff. Fully agree. I think the other thing that I wanted to touch on, and again, it's a little bit of an old school kind of truism, but I think it bears repeating, and I suspect you'll have some interesting thoughts on this, which is most of us, and I'll speak for my own sphere of connections over the last few decades, but I know very few people who had an idea of what they were going to do or wanted to do in college that 10, 20, 30 years later are doing that thing. But rather than mean that in the usual way of you don't know the world's gonna throw at you, or you might have totally different interests, I think where I want to go with this as it relates to this conversation is the world is changing so much more quickly than it maybe used to, that it's a beautiful thing. The world is going to evolve. So if you're doing all the things that we've already discussed, you're kind of instinctively cultivating a skill set and a social acumen that will lend itself to opportunities that will come up that, as of right now, even in your best case scenario, you wouldn't imagine or dream of, because those opportunities or gigs or situations don't even exist yet. So
Yeah.
I like the idea also of kind of reinforcing that, yes, follow your bliss, cultivate, hopefully as much as you can, a skill set that matches your interests so that what you're doing all day, every day, there's some symmetry between what you like to do and what you're good at.
Yeah.
But don't feel boxed in by, needing to know at 20 or 22 or 25,
Right.
maybe even at 35. Like
Yeah.
this is the role that I've trained for, and this is what I will do to make a living because that's going to change.
Yeah.
I know I can speak to that all day as it relates to kind of the writing arts world, but shed some light or maybe back me up and prove what I'm saying from your experience and what you're seeing, Grant, play out
Yeah.
kind of day in and day out in the more I'll have to do this, but the techie gamey, like in your direct sphere,
Yeah.
how is that true?
Yeah, I mean, they say we all have four careers in our lives. We don't all get to be the guy from Japan who I mentioned who just makes ink stones his whole life. And so being curious and constantly learning is a necessary skill. Adapt or die, right?
Yeah.
And I've seen that happen a lot in my industry where people are stuck and they said, I'm going to program in this way on this device, and that device is now obsolete. They don't have a job anymore, right? And so I think it's important to constantly be evolving. I myself, I've been a programmer, I've been a designer, I've been a producer, I've been a creative director, I've been an executive producer. I'm a leadership coach, which like I didn't know was a thing when I went to college, right? I'm still making games, but now I'm making games for an existing game, and so it's just constantly changing and evolving. And for me, I love that. I'm a very curious person. I like the idea of kind of chasing after skills and becoming good at those things. And I love that my career has allowed me to try a bunch of different things and become very good at some of those things and realize I'm not good at some of those things. And and I think it's essential. We won't dig into AI, but like AI is going to change things, right? AI is already changing things. What it's not changing is creativity, right? We're not going to replace human ingenuity and creativity with AI. And so finding ways to work and grow your own ingenuity, creativity, and work through, the changing technology. The technology doesn't matter, right? It's like Nathan and I were talking about it. We've used Unity, we've used Unreal. It doesn't really matter which tool you're using. You just
Yeah.
learn that tool and then you move and use that tool. And so I think it's essential to realize you don't need to know what you're going to do at 20. I knew what I wanted to do at 12, but what I left out from that story is I took a break and worked in the music business for a while. The whole time I was making mods and doing all these things and learning game technology, I thought, man, the music business is really cool. I get to travel with bands and like do all these things, and like turns out it's like not as great as I thought it was going to be. Um, but I went to school to be a video game programmer. I am not a video game programmer full time. I do still program video games. Um, but my career has evolved and I've been open to that evolving and that changing. And I think that's really important. It's also really hard to know what you want to do when you're young, right? Like I got my first gig when I was 19 years old, and I've been in the industry ever since then, and that's crazy to think about. But one of the best designers I ever worked with was a history professor for 15 years and then was like, I want to make video games. Okay.
Yeah.
So he had a PhD. So he was 8 years in college, then 15 years. So he was in his mid 40s when he decided he wanted to make video games, and he's a brilliant game designer. It
Yeah,
just
I,
happens.
I think the number one question any curious and passionate person asks is, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, because you
Yeah.
never really grow up if you're
Right.
still evolving and iterating. And I think it's really instructive. I happen to know the longer version, which is worth exploring another time. But your foray in the music industry. I mean, imagine if that head scratched your itch and you thought,
Yeah.
this is exactly what I want to do. I want to build a life here. The music industry is virtually unrecognizable from what it was 20 years ago. So there's a
Correct.
case in point. We don't need to be talking about AI or gaming. Entire industries have changed since I was a student, in ways that no one would have predicted.
Yeah.
But the whole model of how music was made, how it was disseminated, how it was marketed, sold, and consumed, all of those things are radically different than they were even 20 years ago. And if you had predicted, I think, 20 years ago, how it is today, right? That everyone just holds up a device and an
Yeah.
entire an entire universe of music is available, that would have been seen as equal parts science fiction and fantasy
Yeah.
and an illusion and a delusion. But the point as it relates to the practical aspect of this conversation is, it's scary to think about someone, and there are people that did have genuine expertise in an old model that is no longer applicable. So all the more reason being adaptable, being abreast. To me, the good news or the silver lining there is I think there were a lot of people that got left behind, like dinosaurs, but the handful of folks that were doing what we talked about at the outset, which was being abreast of the trends, following the industry, seeing how the other industries are connecting, they're not going to be left behind because they're seeing
Yeah.
canaries in the coal mine before suddenly you wake up one day and the old music industry or insert name of industry here is just gone. You're kind
Yeah.
of riding that wave.
Yeah. 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 You got to always be kind of looking at the trends and, adapting, but also it still comes back to you have to be great at your craft, right? Whatever that is, you have to be good at it and following the trends of that. So if it's changing, you follow those trends of changing. But you still have to be good at it, right? Like I'm not going to hire someone to be a programmer who is a bad programmer. I'm going to hire a good programmer. But if they also are looking into advanced technologies and looking at ways to do all these other things, that peaks them up a little bit higher in my interest in hiring them. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's an important part of the job, but I also think it's an overlooked part of the job is like, constantly looking at what's coming. I always tell my wife, my number one goal is that we raise curious kids. Unfortunately, my son is very curious and has no sense of self-protection. So those two things together don't go well. But it's he's just hurt a lot.
That, the little boys especially bounce back because that we do go at the world, curiosity first and answer questions later.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not going to let you or hopefully Dr. Prostopnik off the hook. I was going to jokingly say I'm contractually obliged to at least ask about AI. I will tee it up by saying, with maximum humility and a little bit of sardonic, irony, the first season of this speaker series was in the spring of, gosh, I think 23 or maybe 24. But anyway, a couple of years ago, and I made it a point to have a conversation around AI so that we could hash it out and move on. And so I laugh at that it's more relevant than ever in
Yeah.
ways that I don't think any of us anticipated or few of us. But more to the point, even within the world of AI and all the questions that raises as it relates to technology, education, and the job force, AI is still changing. You
Mhm.
already took the nugget that I always want to bring out of these conversations, which is to me, the good news is as it relates to story, humans, nothing can replicate a human story. And that's what makes art or story resonate is the human element that an algorithm can't replicate. But that being said, we have to grapple with AI. I guess I ask you, and I certainly defer and ask our resident professor here. What do we need to be talking about, or what are students that maybe aren't as savvy, that are afraid or don't know what to ask? Like, what should we know about AI as of September 2025?
Um, for me, the first thing I have to start every AI conversation with, because I've been a climate activist for the last 10 years, is until we solve the inequality that AI brings with power usage and pollution and all those things, I am not a fan. That's just all it comes down to. It's lazy programming. They could be better programming. Blockchain solved their problem, some of their problem with the way that they're doing things with the climate. But that to me is number one. The second one is the inequality of theft, right? Like the AI models are trained on our conversations. They're trained on our art. They're trained on things that we did not consent to. So I have to say those two things make me really angry and get them out of the way before I can have an intelligent conversation about using AI.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I think uh, I think AI is interesting in the creative arts because I can see it unlocking certain things. So, for example, one of the games I'm working on is for hyper localized storytellers to prepare people for climate disasters. And what we do with our tool, one of the things that we provide is their ability to generate visual ideas. And so we're using AI models to do that, but the idea is that they then go work with a real local artist to build the actual piece of art, the visual piece of the story. But it helps someone who is a wordsmith, a storyteller, to kind of shape what they want to see in this space because they're not maybe a visual thinker. So that's been helpful. We do not ship those images, though. Very key. We just use them as a way to guide it. Um, I think that programming co-pilots are kind of useful. I've seen some value use in those. My biggest problem with them is that the data and the story, the studies are telling us that it makes worse programmers, and that we're seeing more bugs and more issues with people who are using them. I use them solely in trying to understand context of a language that I've never written before. I'm not letting it write the code for me. I'm just like, I don't understand contextually. I've been writing a lot in verse. I'm a C++ programmer. I've programmed in C++ for 20 years. Now I'm using a language I've never used before. They declare variables differently. I didn't know. So I had to go look that up, and then I'm like, okay, I need to understand this a little bit better. So I think there are places that it's useful, but I think the thing that I worry the most about is that people use AI to replace their brain, not to offload certain things from their brain. If you are using it as a replacement, you are using it wrong and to the detriment of yourself. If you're a student, your goal in life is to learn and to learn how to learn because you will be using that for the rest of your life. If you are offloading your learning and your thinking to an AI agent, you are not learning and you are doing yourself a disservice. Once you're in a professional setting, using summarization tools and things that, we call it AI, but the reality is just a basic algorithm. That's a whole nother can of worms that we could get into. Um, when we look at those things, they can be useful. But I think it's really important to look at all of the ethical concerns and then your own mental growth concerns before you just jump wholehearted into them. That being said, if you're not paying attention to them and seeing what they're doing, you are potentially setting yourself up for failure, right? I'm not saying you need to train yourself on them. I myself don't use them very extensively, and I don't see a lack of growth in myself doing that. So that's another aspect of it. And the last thing I'll say is human satisfaction comes through the art of doing things. And so if we are offloading the doing of things and the struggle of doing things, we're not just never going to be satisfied, right? I love programming. You know why I love programming? Because I look at a problem, I write it down on a whiteboard, and then I sit at my computer and I yell at the screen for 2 hours about why it isn't working. And then when it works, I feel like a god. I genuinely feel like I have created something out of nothing. And what I see on the screen makes me incredibly happy. If I just were to type into an AI model, create this thing for me, and then put it on screen, I would not be happy because I didn't go through the struggle and I wouldn't have learned, right? I'm talking about learning verse and learning this language and stuff. It took me 2 hours to do something that in C++ would have taken me 15 minutes. This morning, I went to do something similar and it took me 5 minutes because now I knew going through the struggle how to do the thing. So my soapbox is over.
No, I mean you just for my money, you just eloquently covered very fairly and thoroughly a lot of different bases. My succinct distillation of my overall views would be the only two things I'm kind of wary about, and this is maybe typical, are the polls. I'm very wary of people that are absolute AI alarmists, especially when they reveal that they don't really know anything about AI. They've heard that it's terrible, it's
Yeah.
going to ruin writing and everything about AI is gonna kill the future. Just like I'm wary of the people that are either paid evangelists or um, people that are using it to cheat the system. Because in my modest capacity, what I've just sang from the rooftops is even if whatever grade level you're at, if you're able to use AI to cheat, it's only hurting your longer term job and career prospects. So,
Yeah.
there is no replacement, and I guess it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but when we talk about AI and technology, there is no replacement for doing things. You just put it much better than I can. But those are the two poles that I'm wary of. I think in the middle is this wonderful gray area where,
Yeah.
like every technology that's come before, there's always room for both skepticism and opportunity. But being aware of it, playing with it, using it in ways that can augment outdated processes, all to the good. But when we get down to the brass tacks of story and soul, human achievement, satisfaction, that can't be replaced. And again, I find that very encouraging and inspiring that
Yeah.
we aren't recreating 2000 or plus years of human evolution. Computers are not going to be able to replace that, but they might help our evolution speed along. Great.
Yeah. 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 I always say this to people. Look, story, you're always going to be able to tell your story, and AI won't, because they aren't you, right? They haven't
Brilliant.
lived your experience. Even though they've maybe taken in a lot of data from you having your phone and your social media and all, they're
Yeah,
not you. They don't know you.
that's
They
right.
don't know your soul.
Well said. I think the good doctor wants to weigh in, which I encourage
I
heartily.
but I was really enjoying your answer about AI because you're saying things that I've been saying to my students and in other places. Particularly the 2 points you made. The one point about offloading yourself, like offloading true creative work to an AI. And we have this like horrible habit we slide into where we're like, I made this thing with AI. And it's like, well, you didn't make anything actually. You
Yeah.
didn't you didn't do anything except type a poorly formatted prompt into a box. And then it made something, and it made something that's by definition derivative, right? And so I always talk with my students about, and I'm a AI skeptic in a lot of ways, but I really liked your point that like you can't ignore it. Like we can't
Mhm.
ignore it, and it is useful sometimes. And I think it's most useful when it's treated more like a tool,
Yeah.
not like a substitute.
Yeah.
So lately I've been like, if I'm working on something in Unreal Engine and something's weird and it's not quite working, like I'm not like, write me some code to do X or make me a blueprint that does Y. I'm like, I am currently doing X, Y, and Z in Unreal Engine. Here is what is happening. I am running into this problem. What are some things I should check? And then the AI like gives me some suggestions, and I'll be honest, like some of those suggestions are terrible.
Yeah.
But a lot of them are pretty good actually, because what it's really doing is just aggregating a lot of searches that I'd otherwise be doing for myself.
Right.
But it's a question coming from a place of at least a certain amount of knowledge, and then the tool helps me kind of supplement that knowledge and learn something new. And so I kind of like it for that, but I don't like it when we're just making like the AI just makes something for us, and
Yeah.
then we're just sabotaging ourselves or sabotaging our growth and our creativity. So I'm always talking with my students about that. And I also liked your point you made about happiness and about satisfaction in life. I've been thinking a lot about sometimes, in my lazier moments, I think about like what would I be doing if it were 1900? Wouldn't be sitting on my couch watching, Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
I'd be doing something and I'd probably be happier. And I try to remind myself of that. Or I might not be. Life is brutish, nasty, and short, right? So maybe I wouldn't be
Right.
happier, but I'd be doing something. I'd be trying to accomplish something. And so I kind of like that point too, because if the AI steals all that initiative from us, then it's not too good either. I do have a question.
Yeah.
It might be related to AI. I don't know. You can decide. But it strikes me, so from a game design standpoint, the game industry, right? Like I'm an academic, I'm a professor, I have been for kind of a while now. So I do teach game design, and some of my research has involved serious games, games with a purpose, things like that. But like in terms of like the commercial entertainment game industry, I mostly have kind of an outsider's, maybe a knowledgeable outsider's perspective, but mostly an outsider's perspective. My perspective tells me right now that the game industry is kind of a mess, kind of a disaster, and that we've lost sight in so many ways that games are art.
Mm.
And we should be trying to make, like, I guess it comes back to this beginning. And the question isn't really a question, it's just I'm curious your perspective, thoughts on it. But um we we're making games to, like, all they are is a vehicle to get to part people from their money.
Sure.
Like, we've almost hit this point where, like, I don't care if it's a good game. What I care is if the dopamine loop can reach into someone's wallet and get money. So let's do seasons, let's do skins, let's do this,
Mhm.
let's do this. And the experience, like, who cares? If it's tricking your brain into, like, spending money, like, it's a good game because it
Yeah.
was commercially
Yeah.
successful.
Yeah.
But,
Right.
like,
Made money.
the reality is, I think that's not really true. A lot of these things are not good games, and now they're starting to get some backlash. I feel like I sense there's backlash from different quarters about these business models that have kind of evolved over the past 10 to 15 years. And so I'm just curious, your point of view as an insider, as someone who's been there and seen it and probably watched it evolve. And I don't know, I'm just curious. What are your thoughts? And maybe AI is a factor, maybe it's not. I don't know. What do you
Yeah,
think?
that's a broad ranging question. The industry's in a bit of a struggle time, and there's a myriad of reasons why we're here. Probably the biggest being the large injection of VC funding into the industry during COVID. We grew too rapidly and unsustainably. And what happens when you get VC funding is they want to see unrestricted growth, and the game industry is not an unrestricted growth business; it's a hits business. And so what happens is you might be incredibly successful with your first game, and your second game is an absolute dud. And so we've seen a lot of companies get shut down and get in a lot of trouble because of that VC investment. You might be able to hear my kids screaming. They're trying to go to bed right now. And so that's been a big part of it. AI is not really part of it. It's a scapegoat. It's an excuse to why the industry is struggling. Um, but I do think we'll feel the repercussions of that in the next 2 to 3 years, as companies and individuals within those companies learn to use the technology, and it maybe does cost some jobs. Um, to the point about the over commercialization and the what I'll call extractive business models. We've followed the logical path of capitalism in the game industry, right? So um, just like extractive models of colonialism, we followed the same track of how do we maximize the profit off of a small amount of people. And frankly, it's evil. It's fairly abhorrent. And what happens is a lot of those people are not wealthy individuals who can afford it. They get stuck in the same addiction loops as gambling addicts. Now, again, I'm speaking about a very specific type of game and game loop, using dark patterns and things like that. Um, I think what we're seeing as some of these bigger companies are failing because, again, they were expected to be unrestricted growth,
Right.
is people are leaving and starting more artistic, creative indie games. Those games have never gone away, right? There's always been artistic games. Like you said, they're just not necessarily rewarded financially or declared success because we measure success as finance. We try to reward them with awards, similar to how the movie business does that, right? They try to give Oscars and other awards, Golden Globes, to maybe not financially successful, but things that push the craft forward or tell a story in a unique way. Um, so I do think there's space for all of those types of games to exist in the world. We have gamers of all types. My neighbor is a firefighter, and he's always playing Settlers of Catan on his phone. That's a game. That's fine. He's probably spending money on it that he probably doesn't have, but oh, whatever, it's fine. You might be playing some super indie game that's someone talking about how to deal with their mental health issues. We have the space for that in the industry. So I'm incredibly hopeful, because one thing that I've seen happen, in my 20 years, is the democratization of game development. When I started making games, there weren't books. There were very few universities. There was no YouTube or any way to learn how to make games, or AI co-pilots or whatever. And so you just opened whatever, I think I used VI or whatever, and I just typed words until something compiled, and then I felt really excited about it. Now you can, you can go and watch someone give you a tutorial of exactly how to build a certain type of game, and then you can put your own twist on top of that. The tools are free, the lessons are free, and that excites me because what we get from that is a diversity of experiences and stories and things coming out within that. I'm a very interesting person. I'll speak personally. I do two different things in my game development. I'll separate that from my leadership coaching and consulting. My game development time. Um, I'm trying to explore new models of play, and I'm trying to tell stories and experiences that mean something. I'm trying to inject philosophy into game development, and I've done that with the last couple games that I've worked on, and they've been commercial flops, but I don't care. I said something, and the thing I said is out there. It's probably not different from someone who's written a book, and that book comes out and nobody reads it. You needed to say it. You needed to say that thing, and we could talk about the level of hidden narcissism in our brain that makes us think that the thing we have to say is worth someone else's time to ingest. But to me, I'm really hopeful about it because I get to mess around with Fortnite and UEFN and make these really tight, fun, iterative experiences that are trying to do interesting things with play, and share new experiences. But then I can really labor on these experiences that are philosophical. So that's a very broad answer to your very broad question.
No, that was great. And actually, I like your point about like the act of doing, the act of making actually has value.
Yeah.
Like just you can put it out in the world, and if no one ever sees it but you, that doesn't mean it wasn't worth your time. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that. We think that, like you mentioned, like you have like people having a brand, right? And sometimes to me, I get it. I get the business reasons for that, but like you look at people who have a brand and it's like, are you doing life right? I'm not sure if you are. Maybe you are. I don't know. But I do have questions. I like that answer. I thought that was very interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Here, here. Believe it or not, we've flown through an hour, but you actually also, not only was that answer like an absolute grand slam on so many levels, Grant, but you touched on something that, again, the only other thing I would have said tonight, and you just gave me the opportunity to kind of, my parting shot would be, again, whether we're talking about the arts world or tech dash gaming, but all of it, what I think the 21st century has irrefutably done is there's been a democratization of both content and the ways it can be created. So despite, kind of the vicissitudes and there's setbacks, there's concerns, all of the above. And I'm comfortable in that gray area. But the reality is that the opportunity to tell stories and create and participate has unarguably become more inclusive and less exclusive, and there's a lot of room for hope there. There's a lot of room for optimism. Lest I sound Pollyannish, I really mean that. I find, even as a writer, an old school writer, I love the idea that more voices have an opportunity to be heard, and that does cover the gamut from being able to have a breakthrough title or write a book that maybe no one else sees. But the fact that the possibility is there, where in an earlier, in what the naysayers might call a golden era, there were a lot of voices that simply didn't have a way, literally, of being heard or published. I find optimism there.
Yeah, the best book that any of us have never read didn't get published, right? Like that there's books out there that writers have written that are probably better than anything we've ever read, but they didn't get the opportunity, right? The great American novel may have been usurped already, but we didn't read it because they didn't get that option. And now you can just publish your book on Kindle, right? It's not hard.
Yep. Yeah. And I think there's something to celebrate there. Um, Grant, I couldn't be more grateful on at least like three levels. One, thank you for being here and sharing your expertise. Uh, Endlessly enjoyable. The answers that you gave, although I knew you're the man, that's why I have you here tonight. But just crystallizing a lot of different topics, and making them very digestible. But I certainly want to give you the last word. If there was anything I didn't ask or something that you'd like to say as a parting shot, far be it for me to tee it up when I can just hand you the mic and say, send us away, send us off.
Look, if you want to make games, make games. If you want to write books, write books. There's nothing stopping you, except for your own lack of desire, right? Like I was talking to a guy, I was in an Uber and I was talking to a guy in an Uber when I was in Seattle last week, and he writes comic books. And I was talking to him about, this comic book, this world that he's creating within this comic book. And he was talking about how, he drives Uber like 6 hours a day so he can go home and he can make comic books, and all this technology is like enabling him to do these things. And I was like, man, I'm really proud of you, because you're doing it. You're getting over all those obstacles that seem to be able to come in the way of other people, which is like, oh, I have the life, I have all these things. But the reality is, you know, the way to do a thing is to do the thing. So people always ask me, how do I get into the game industry? And I say, start making games. People say, how do I make movies? Start making movies. How do you write books? Write books. So just do it. And it doesn't matter if you publish them. It doesn't matter if they come out, but you learn your craft. We all started somewhere, and the things that I made at the beginning were terrible, and I wouldn't go back and play them now. And even my first book, I'm not real proud of it. I'm proud I published a first book, but my third and fourth book were way better than my first book. And so, it's important to realize that that's what it takes. You just got to do the thing.
Amazing. Amazing. And look, we're all works in progress, right? Peaks
Yeah.
and valleys, successes, achievements, but those that endure and have sustained success, again, it comes back to some of the things we've touched on already tonight: being curious, being active, being part of a community. These are all ways to kind of future proof yourself and stay young and stay in the game. So, Grant, to be continued, because I have a feeling, because of the topics we talk about tend to be both changing and evergreen, there'll
Yeah.
be ample opportunity to check in and get some more nuggets of wisdom. But for tonight, on behalf of Shenandoah University, huge gratitude for being here. And I'm so grateful that we had a chance to record this, because this is definitely a conversation that people that weren't able to be here tonight can enjoy and learn from and discover into the future. So all good and huge gratitude. So be
Thank you.
well, and we will see you again soon.
All right. Thank you all so much.